My name is Elena Martinez, and for 32 years I was half of something beautiful. My husband Roberto and I built our life together brick by brick, decision by decision, dream by dream. We raised our son Michael in a home filled with love, sacrifice, and the kind of quiet strength that comes from two people who truly understand each other. When Roberto died 6 months ago from a sudden heart attack, I didn't just lose my husband. I lost my anchor, my best friend, and the only person who truly knew all of me. The grief was so overwhelming that for weeks I could barely function. I would sit in our kitchen, staring at his empty coffee cup that I couldn't bring myself to wash, wondering how I was supposed to navigate this world without him. Michael came to the funeral, of course. He stood beside me at the service, his arm around my shoulders as neighbors and friends offered their condolences. For a moment I thought maybe this tragedy would bring us closer together. Maybe losing his father would remind him that family is all we really have in this world. I was wrong. The first sign came 3 days after the funeral. I was still in my grief fog, still wearing the same black dress I'd worn to the service, when Michael knocked on my door. But this wasn't the gentle, concerned knock of a son checking on his grieving mother. This was the sharp, impatient rap of someone who had business to conduct. "Mom, we need to talk," he said the moment I opened the door. "No, how are you holding up? No, have you been eating?" Just straight to business. I led him to the living room, the same room where his father and I had made countless decisions together, where we'd planned Michael's education, discussed his future, worried about his happiness. Now Michael sat across from me in his father's chair, pulling out a manila folder like he was conducting a business meeting. "Look, Mom, I know this is hard, but we need to be practical about your situation," he began, and something cold settled in my stomach. "Dad's gone and you're not exactly young anymore. You're 52 and let's be honest, you've never really managed anything on your own." I stared at him, this man I had carried for 9 months, nursed through countless illnesses, supported through college, celebrated at his wedding. This man who was looking at me like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person who was drowning in grief. "I've been thinking about it, and I really think the best thing would be for you to sell this house and move in with Jennifer and me. You shouldn't be alone right now, and frankly, maintaining this place is going to be too much for you." The house, our house, the place where Roberto and I had shared 3 decades of life, where every room held memories that were all I had left of him. Michael was talking about it like it was just real estate, just an asset to be liquidated. "Michael," I said carefully, my voice barely above a whisper, "I'm not ready to make any big decisions right now. I just lost your father. I need time to—" "Time for what?" he interrupted, and there was something in his tone that made me look up sharply. "Time to sit here feeling sorry for yourself? Mom, Dad's gone, that's the reality. And the reality is also that you've never been particularly capable on your own. Dad handled everything, the finances, the house maintenance, the important decisions. You were just along for the ride." The words hit me like physical blows. Along for the ride. As if 32 years of partnership, of building a life together, of making countless contributions to our family, had been nothing more than passive existence. "That's not true, Michael," I said, but my voice was weak, uncertain. The grief had left me feeling so fragile, so disconnected from who I used to be. "Isn't it?" He leaned forward, and I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before, a kind of cold calculation. "When was the last time you balanced a checkbook? Do you even know how much Dad's life insurance was? Do you understand what his pension situation is? Face it, Mom, without Dad, you're nothing. Without Dad, you're nothing." The words echoed in the suddenly silent room. My son, my only child, the boy I had sung to sleep for years, whose scraped knees I had kissed, whose dreams I had nurtured, had just told me that I was nothing without my husband. And in that moment, something inside me that had been soft with grief began to harden. But I didn't let Michael see that hardening. Not yet. Instead, I nodded slowly, letting him think his cruel words had simply confirmed what I already knew about myself. Let him believe that his mother was just a broken-down widow who needed to be managed like an incompetent child. "Maybe you're right," I said quietly, and I watched something like satisfaction flash across his face. "I don't know how to handle everything on my own." "I'm glad you're being realistic about this," he said, already reaching for his phone. "I've actually been talking to Jennifer about converting the guest room. We can move your essential furniture there, the bed, maybe that old dresser you're attached to. The rest we can sell or donate." He was talking about dismantling my life like he was planning a garage sale. And the worst part was that some treacherous part of my grief-stricken mind was almost relieved. Maybe it would be easier to let someone else make the decisions. Maybe Michael was right, and I really couldn't handle things on my own. But then I thought about Roberto, and what he would say if he could see this conversation happening. Roberto, who had always spoken about me with such pride, who had consulted me on every major decision, who had treated me as a true partner in every sense of the word. "What about Dad's study?" I asked. "All his books, his papers." "We'll go through everything," Michael said dismissively. "Keep anything with sentimental value, sell or donate the rest." Most of that stuff is just taking up space anyway. Just taking up space. Like Roberto's entire intellectual life, his passion for history and literature, his carefully curated collection of books that had taken him decades to assemble, was nothing more than clutter to be cleared out. I think that was the moment I realized that my son didn't just see me as incompetent. He saw everything about our life, everything Roberto and I had built together, as having no real value. We were just obstacles to his vision of efficiency, inconvenient remnants of a past he was ready to sweep away. "I'll need a few days to think about this," I said, but Michael was already shaking his head. "Mom, the longer you wait, the harder it's going to be, and honestly, I've already started the process. I've contacted a realtor to get an estimate on the house value, and Jennifer has already started clearing out the guest room. We're trying to make this as easy as possible for you. As easy as possible for me, as if uprooting my entire life and moving into their spare room like an unwanted relative was some kind of kindness. As if making decisions about my future without consulting me was helping rather than controlling. Over the following weeks, Michael's visits became more frequent and more invasive. He would arrive unannounced to check on me, but these visits always seemed to involve measuring rooms, photographing furniture, or having hushed phone conversations with Jennifer about logistics I wasn't invited to discuss. During one particularly brutal afternoon, I overheard him on the phone with someone he called the estate sale coordinator. "Most of it's just typical old people stuff," he was saying from my kitchen, apparently believing I was napping in the bedroom. "Nothing really valuable. The furniture is decent but dated. The real money is in the house itself once we get her moved out. Old people stuff." At 52, apparently I had already been relegated to the category of elderly person whose possessions were inherently worthless. But what stung even more was the casual way he discussed getting me moved out, as if I were a tenant whose lease had expired rather than the owner of the home where I'd lived for 3 decades. The breaking point came during what Michael called the family meeting. He arrived on a Sunday afternoon with Jennifer and their 12-year-old daughter Emma, my granddaughter whom I adored. But instead of a family visit, this felt like an intervention. "Mom," Michael said, settling into Roberto's chair while Jennifer positioned herself on the edge of the sofa like she was ready to spring into action, "we need to talk about your future." Emma sat quietly beside her mother, looking uncomfortable and confused. This child who usually ran to me with hugs and excited chatter about school and friends was now watching me with something that looked like pity. "We've been patient," Jennifer began, her voice dripping with false concern, "but this situation can't continue indefinitely. You're not taking care of yourself, you're not engaging with life, and frankly, it's starting to affect Emma." I looked at my granddaughter, whose expression immediately became guilty and distressed. "Emma's worried about me. She's asked several times why Grandma always looks so sad," Michael said. "Why you don't do fun things anymore, why you don't want to go places or see people. It's confusing for a child to see an adult who's given up on life." Given up on life. Because I was still grieving 6 weeks after losing my husband of 32 years, they had concluded that I had surrendered my will to live. "I haven't given up," I said quietly. "I'm just processing everything." "Processing," Jennifer repeated with barely concealed impatience. "Elena, at some point processing becomes wallowing. And wallowing isn't healthy for you or for anyone who cares about you." The audacity of this woman who had known me for only 8 years, who had never experienced the loss of a life partner, who had barely spoken to me during most family gatherings, lecturing me about the appropriate timeline for grief was breathtaking. "We've made some decisions," Michael announced, and those words sent ice through my veins. "The house goes on the market next week. I've already signed the listing agreement." The room went completely silent. Even Emma stopped fidgeting. "You signed a listing agreement?" I repeated slowly. "For my house." "For our house," Michael corrected. "Dad put my name on the deed 3 years ago, remember? Joint ownership. And since you're clearly not in a position to make these kinds of major decisions right now, I felt it was important to move forward with what needed to be done." I stared at the document he pulled from his folder. It was real. Roberto had indeed added Michael's name to the deed. But I knew why he'd done it, and it wasn't to give our son unilateral decision-making power. It was a precaution, a way to ensure that if something happened to both of us, the property could be handled without getting tied up in probate court. Roberto had been protecting our family's future, not authorizing our son to override my wishes during the most vulnerable period of my life. "This was never meant to give you the right to make decisions without me," I said, but Michael just shrugged. "The way I see it, Dad knew what he was doing. He made sure there would be someone capable of handling important decisions if you weren't able to, and right now you're not able to." There it was again. The fundamental assumption that grief had somehow erased my capacity for rational thought, that mourning my husband meant I was no longer competent to manage my own life. "I want you to cancel the listing," I said firmly. "I can't do that. We've already invested money in preparing the house for sale, and we have interested buyers coming to look at it this weekend. Then I'll call the realtor myself and tell them to cancel it. Mom, Michael's voice took on a patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. You're not thinking clearly right now. The grief has clouded your judgment. This house is too big for one person, too expensive to maintain on a widow's income, and honestly, being here is just keeping you stuck in the past. Maybe I want to be stuck in the past. Maybe this house and these memories are all I have left of your father. That's exactly the problem, Jennifer interjected. You're using this house as a shrine instead of a home. You're hiding here instead of moving forward with your life. That's not healthy, and it's not what Roberto would have wanted for you. The presumption of this woman, telling me what my own husband would have wanted, was so outrageous I almost laughed. But there was nothing funny about watching my son nod in agreement with his wife's assessment of my mental state. Where exactly am I supposed to live? I asked. With us, Michael said, as if this were the most obvious solution in the world. Jennifer has already converted the guest room. We can accommodate all your essential belongings, and you'll have the security of family nearby. What about my non-essential belongings? We'll have an estate sale for most of the furniture and household items. The proceeds will go into your savings account to help cover your future expenses. They had already planned the dismantling of my entire life, right down to which of my possessions deserved to survive the transition and which should be sold to strangers. And if I refuse? Michael and Jennifer exchanged a look that I didn't like at all. Mom, Michael said carefully, you're not really in a position to refuse. Legally, I have the right to sell this house with or without your cooperation. And practically speaking, you don't have anywhere else to go or the resources to maintain this place on your own. There it was, the threat delivered with the tone of someone explaining reality to a child. Submit to our plan or we'll force you to submit to our plan. I need some time to think about this, I said, but Jennifer was already shaking her head. Elena, you've had 6 weeks to think. At some point, thinking becomes procrastinating, and procrastinating becomes self-destructive. We're trying to help you, but we can only do that if you let us. Help me by selling my house against my wishes, disposing of my belongings without my input, and relocating me to their spare room where I could be monitored and managed like an incompetent elderly relative. Can I at least have until the end of the week to get used to the idea? The listing goes live tomorrow, Michael said, but don't worry, it usually takes a few weeks to find the right buyer. You'll have time to adjust. Adjust, as if I were a child being told about an unwelcome change in routine, rather than an adult woman watching her son orchestrate the destruction of her independence. That night, after they had left me alone in the house they had already decided to sell, I sat in Roberto's study surrounded by the books Michael had dismissed as taking up space. I ran my fingers along the spines of volumes Roberto had collected over decades, each one representing some interest or passion or moment of curiosity in his rich intellectual life. These books, this room, this house, they weren't just taking up space. They were the physical manifestation of a life well lived, of dreams pursued and interests cultivated and love shared. They were proof that Roberto and I had been more than just people who existed. We had been people who created and explored and built something meaningful together. And our son saw all of it as nothing more than clutter to be cleared away. That's when I realized that what Michael was doing wasn't really about helping me or protecting me or ensuring my welfare. It was about erasing the life Roberto and I had built because he found it inconvenient to acknowledge that his parents had been complex, capable people with their own dreams and resources and plans. It was easier for him to see me as a helpless widow than to accept that I might be a woman with her own strengths and options. But what Michael didn't know, what no one except Roberto and I had ever known, was that I did have options. Options that my son couldn't imagine because he had never bothered to see me as anything more than his father's dependent wife. 15 years earlier, during one of our anniversary trips to Europe, Roberto and I had fallen in love with a small villa in Valencia, Spain. We had been exploring the region, staying in a charming bed and breakfast run by an elderly Spanish woman named Carmen, who treated us like family from the moment we arrived. On our last day, Carmen had mentioned that she was thinking of selling her property. Her children lived in Madrid, she said, and she was getting too old to manage a business that required so much energy and attention to detail. But I want to sell to people who will love this place, she had told us over breakfast. Not to some corporation that will turn it into another generic hotel. I want to sell to people who understand what makes a house a home. Roberto and I looked at each other across the breakfast table, and I saw the same thought in his eyes that was forming in my mind. We had been talking for years about what we wanted our retirement to look like, where we might want to spend our golden years. Spain had always been on our list of possibilities, but suddenly it felt like more than just a possibility. How much would you want for it? Roberto asked carefully. Carmen named a price that was far below what we knew the property was worth, especially given its location and the income it generated. When we asked why she was willing to sell for so little, she smiled and said, "Because I can tell that you would take care of it the way I have. That's worth more to me than money." We spent the rest of that trip walking through the villa, imagining ourselves living there. The property consisted of the main house with 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms, a separate guest cottage that Carmen rented to tourists, and a beautiful garden filled with orange and lemon trees. It was close enough to the beach to walk there in 10 minutes, but far enough from the tourist areas to feel private and peaceful. More than that, there was something about the place that felt right. The light streaming through the windows, the way the rooms flowed together, the view from the terrace, everything about it spoke to us in a way that felt like coming home. We bought the villa using savings we had accumulated over 20 years of careful financial planning. Money that we had never told Michael about because we wanted this to be our secret, our private dream, our insurance policy against an uncertain future. For 15 years, we had spent every possible vacation at the Spanish villa. We had renovated it slowly and lovingly, turning it into exactly the kind of place we wanted to spend our retirement. We had also continued Carmen's practice of renting out the guest cottage to tourists, which provided a steady income stream that we kept in a separate Spanish bank account. By the time Roberto died, the villa was worth nearly $400,000, and the rental income provided about $3,000 per month. Combined with Roberto's life insurance, his pension, and our other savings, I was actually in much better financial shape than my son realized. But I had never told Michael any of this. During those early conversations when he was dismissing me as helpless and dependent, something had held me back from revealing the full extent of my resources. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the part of me that Roberto had always said was more strategic than I gave myself credit for. Or maybe I just wanted to see exactly how far my son was willing to go with his assumption that I was powerless. Now I knew. He was willing to sell my house without my consent, dispose of my belongings without my input, and relocate me to his spare room where I could be supervised and managed like an incompetent child. He was willing to erase everything Roberto and I had built together, because he found it easier to see me as a burden than to acknowledge me as a person with my own capabilities and resources. But what he didn't realize was that while he had been planning to control my future, I had been quietly preparing for my independence. The next morning, I called Miguel Herrera, the Spanish lawyer who had handled the villa purchase and had been managing our rental agreements for years. I explained what was happening with Michael and the house sale, and Miguel was both sympathetic and outraged on my behalf. "Señora Martinez," he said in his careful English, "what your son is doing is not legal in Spain. Children cannot simply decide what is best for their parents and force them to comply. You are an adult woman with full legal rights, and no one, not even family, can override your decisions about where to live or how to manage your property." "I'm thinking about coming to Spain," I told him. "Permanently. This would make me very happy," Miguel replied warmly, "and I can help you with all the paperwork to establish residency. How quickly would you want to make this transition?" "As quickly as possible. Give me 1 week to prepare everything. I will coordinate with the property management company to clear out the guest cottage, arrange for utilities and internet to be transferred to your name, and prepare all the residency documents you will need." That afternoon, I called the airline and booked a one-way ticket to Valencia. The flight was scheduled for the following Saturday, exactly 1 week from the day Michael planned to start showing my house to potential buyers. I spent the rest of the week in a strange state of calm anticipation. I watched Michael and Jennifer come and go, making preparations for the house sale, discussing logistics for my relocation to their guest room. I listened to them talk about me in the third person even when I was in the room, as if my grief had rendered me not just helpless but invisible. I let them pack up Roberto's study, watching silently as they carelessly boxed up books that had meant the world to him. I let them sort through our personal belongings, deciding what was worth keeping and what should be discarded. I let them treat me like an inconvenience to be managed, rather than a woman making her own careful plans. All the while, I was secretly packing a single suitcase with my most essential belongings. Important documents, medication, a few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to my mother, some photographs of Roberto and me from our trips to Spain. Everything else I was leaving behind. They could keep the furniture, the household items, all the material things they had been so eager to sort through and redistribute. But they couldn't keep me. The night before my flight, I sat in Roberto's study one last time, surrounded by the books and papers and mementos of a life well lived. I thought about all the conversations we'd had in this room, all the plans we'd made, all the dreams we'd shared. "I'm going to Spain," I whispered to his memory. "I'm going to live in our house by the Mediterranean, and I'm going to prove to myself and to Michael that I'm stronger than any of us realized." I could almost hear his voice responding, warm with pride and encouragement. "I always knew you were, Alina. I was just waiting for you to figure it out." Saturday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of weather that made me think longingly of Spanish sunshine. Michael and Jennifer had arranged to meet the first potential buyers at 10 o'clock, which meant they would be occupied with showing the house while I made my escape. I called a taxi at 9:30, telling the driver I needed to get to the airport for an international flight. He was a kind man named Carlos who had emigrated from El Salvador 20 years earlier, and when I told him I was moving to Spain, he smiled and said, "Ah, España, beautiful country. My wife and I went there for our anniversary. You have family there." "In a way," I replied, thinking about the villa that was waiting for me, the home Roberto and I had created together that would now become my sanctuary. "I have a home there." At the airport, I used my Spanish credit card, the one connected to our Valencia bank account that Michael had never known existed, to upgrade my ticket to first class. It felt like a small act of rebellion, a way of celebrating the independence I was about to reclaim. As the plane lifted off, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Roberto died. I felt free. I also felt my phone buzzing with increasingly frantic calls from Michael and Jennifer, but I didn't answer. Let them wonder where the helpless widow had disappeared to. Let them explain to the potential buyers why the house owner was nowhere to be found. Let them figure out how to proceed with their plans when the woman they had been planning to relocate had simply vanished. The flight to Valencia gave me 8 hours to think about everything that had led to this moment. I thought about Roberto and how proud he would be that I had found the courage to choose my own path. I thought about the Spanish villa that was waiting for me, our secret sanctuary that was about to become my new beginning. But mostly, I thought about the phone call I was going to make to Michael once I was settled in Spain. The phone call where I would explain that his helpless mother had just relocated to another country without needing anyone's permission or assistance. When the plane landed in Valencia, Miguel Herrera was waiting for me at the airport with a warm smile and a bouquet of flowers from the villa's garden. "Welcome home, Señor Martinez," he said in Spanish, and for the first time in months I felt like I truly was coming home. The drive to the villa took about 45 minutes through countryside that was green and golden in the late afternoon sun. I had forgotten how beautiful this part of Spain was, how the light seemed different here, softer and more forgiving than the harsh fluorescent lights of my son's house. When we pulled into the driveway of the villa, I felt tears coming to my eyes, but for the first time since Roberto's death, they were tears of joy rather than grief. Roberto and I had planted those orange trees in the front yard. We had chosen those blue tiles around the front door. We had sat on that terrace countless evenings, drinking wine and planning our future. Inside, everything was exactly as we had left it during our last visit. Our books were still on the shelves we'd built together. The photographs from our travels were still on the walls. The comfortable furniture we'd chosen specifically for this space was waiting like old friends. But more than that, the house felt like Roberto was still here with me. Not in a sad, haunting way, but in the way that places hold the love that was shared within them. Every room reminded me of conversations we'd had, plans we'd made, dreams we'd shared about the retirement we would spend together in this beautiful place. For the first time since his death, being surrounded by memories of Roberto felt comforting rather than devastating. I spent my first evening in Spain on the terrace, watching the sunset and listening to the sound of the Mediterranean in the distance. I thought about Michael and Jennifer, probably spending their evening trying to figure out what had happened to the helpless woman they'd been so sure they could control. At 9 o'clock Spanish time, 3 o'clock in the afternoon back home, I finally made the call. Michael answered on the first ring, his voice frantic and angry. "Mom, where the hell are you? We came back from showing the house and you were gone. Jennifer is having a panic attack and we've been calling hospitals and police stations. The buyers are asking questions we can't answer and I have no idea what to tell them." "Michael," I said calmly, enjoying the sound of Mediterranean waves in the background, "I'm fine." "Where are you? Are you at a hotel? Did someone pick you up? Why didn't you tell us you were leaving? Do you have any idea how worried we've been?" "I'm in Spain." The silence that followed was so long I thought the call might have dropped. "You're what?" "I'm in Spain. In Valencia specifically, in the house your father and I bought 15 years ago." Another long silence, followed by the sound of Michael's voice becoming very small and uncertain. "What house?" "Mom, what are you talking about?" "The house we bought with money we saved over 20 years of careful budgeting. The house we've been using as a rental property to supplement our retirement income. The house that's now worth about $400,000 and provides me with roughly $3,000 a month in rental income." I could hear him breathing, but no words were coming out. "Miguel Herrera is my lawyer here," I continued conversationally. "He's helped me arrange for permanent residency. I've also transferred most of my American savings to Spanish accounts since I'll be living here permanently now." "Mom, you can't. You can't just move to another country. You don't know anyone there. You don't speak the language well enough to live there. You can't take care of yourself in a foreign country." "Actually, I speak Spanish quite fluently." Your father and I spent 15 years vacationing here, remember? And I know quite a few people in the international community here. Miguel has already introduced me to several other Americans and British retirees who have made similar transitions. As for taking care of myself, I looked around at the beautiful home Roberto and I had created together, at the life I was already rebuilding in a place where I felt truly at peace for the first time since his death. I seemed to be managing just fine. This is insane. Michael's voice was rising now, taking on the tone of someone who was beginning to realize that his assumptions had been completely wrong. You can't make decisions like this on your own. You're still grieving, and you're obviously not thinking clearly. You can't just run away because you don't like our plans for your future. Michael, I interrupted, my voice cutting through his protest like a blade. Let me be very clear about something. I am a 52-year-old woman with a college degree, 30 years of work experience, enough financial resources to live comfortably for the rest of my life, and a house in one of the most beautiful parts of Europe. The only thing I was incapable of was allowing you to continue treating me like an incompetent child. But you told us you couldn't handle things on your own. You agreed to move in with us. You let us make all these arrangements. I said what you wanted to hear because I wanted to see how far you were willing to go with your assumption that I was helpless. And you exceeded even my worst expectations. I could hear Jennifer in the background now, asking frantic questions that Michael was trying to answer in sharp whispers. Mom, please, he said, his voice taking on a wheedling tone I'd never heard from him before. You're being irrational. You can't just run away to Spain because your feelings got hurt. Come home and we'll talk about this like adults. I am home, I said simply, watching the sun set over the Mediterranean from my own terrace, and I am talking to you like an adult. The problem is that you're not listening like one. What about the house sale? What about your belongings? What about Emma? You can't just abandon your granddaughter. The house sale was your decision, made without consulting me. My belongings, as you called them, were mostly things you'd already decided weren't worth keeping anyway. And as for Emma, I'll be delighted to have her visit me in Spain anytime you want to send her. She'll love the beach. This is ridiculous. You can't afford to maintain a house in Spain on your own. Actually, I can. The house is completely paid off, the property taxes here are minimal, and the rental income I've been earning from the guest cottage for the past 15 years has built up quite a substantial nest egg. But thank you for your concern about my finances. There was another long pause, and when Michael spoke again, his voice had lost all its authority and certainty. Mom, he said quietly, I was trying to help you, I thought. I thought you needed someone to take care of you. No, Michael, you were trying to control me. You were trying to manage me like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be supported. You decided I was helpless without asking me how I felt or what I needed. You made plans for my future without consulting me about what I wanted. That's not helping, that's taking over. We thought you were falling apart. You seemed so lost, so unable to cope. I was grieving, Michael. I was mourning the loss of my life partner and trying to figure out how to live without him. That's a normal, healthy process that takes time. It doesn't mean I was incompetent or incapable of making decisions about my own life. But you weren't making any decisions, you were just sitting there. I was processing the biggest loss of my life. And while I was doing that, you decided that grief meant I was no longer capable of rational thought. You assumed that because I was sad, I was also helpless. You never once asked me what I needed or how you could support me through this difficult time. You just decided what was best for me and started implementing your plan. I didn't know what else to do, he said, and for the first time since Roberto's death, he sounded like my son again rather than someone trying to manage my life. You could have asked me, you could have offered to help without assuming I needed to be rescued. You could have treated me like an adult who was going through a difficult time instead of like a child who couldn't be trusted to make her own decisions. I was scared, he admitted. I was scared of losing you too, and I thought if I could just control the situation, I could keep you safe. You can't keep people safe by controlling them, Michael. You can only keep them safe by loving them and trusting them to make their own decisions, even when those decisions surprise you. We talked for another hour, and gradually I heard the Michael I remembered beginning to emerge from underneath the controlling stranger who had been trying to manage my life. He asked about the villa, about Valencia, about my plans for the future. He even laughed when I told him about upgrading to first class with the credit card he never knew I had. Mom, he said finally, I owe you a huge apology. I was completely wrong about everything. I had no idea you and Dad had built all this, had planned all this. I had no idea you were so capable of this kind of independence. Your father and I were always full partners, I replied. In everything, the financial planning, the house purchase, the decision to create this backup plan for our future. I wasn't just along for the ride, Michael. I was an equal participant in building the life we shared. I see that now, and I see how insulting and hurtful it must have been for me to assume you couldn't survive without someone taking care of you. It was, but what hurt even more was realizing that you had never really seen me as an independent person. Even before your father died, you thought of me as his dependent rather than his partner. That's going to change, he said firmly. I promise you, Mom, that's going to change. 3 months later, Michael, Jennifer, and Emma came to visit me in Valencia. I was nervous about seeing them, particularly Jennifer, who had been such an active participant in the plan to relocate me to their guest room. But the moment Emma ran off the plane and into my arms, I knew everything was going to be different. Grandma Alina, you look so happy, and your house is even more beautiful than in the pictures you sent. The next 2 weeks were a revelation. Michael and Jennifer seemed genuinely amazed by the life I had built for myself. They met my Spanish friends, attended community events with my international neighbors, and spent long days on the beaches that had become my regular walking spots. Mom, Michael said one evening as we sat on the terrace watching Emma chase fireflies in the garden, I owe you another apology. I had no idea you and Dad had created all this. I had no idea you were capable of this kind of life. Your father and I shared everything, I replied, sipping the Spanish wine that had become part of my evening routine. The dreaming, the planning, the decision-making. We were true partners in every sense. I see that now, and I'm ashamed of how I treated you. I'm ashamed that I assumed grief meant incompetence. I'm ashamed that I tried to erase the life you and Dad built together because I thought it was too complicated for you to handle alone. Jennifer, who had been quieter during this visit than I'd ever seen her, spoke up from her chair beside the orange trees. Elena, I owe you an apology too. I was so focused on what I thought you needed that I never bothered to find out what you actually wanted. And I'm sorry for how we spoke to you, how we treated your belongings, how we dismissed your feelings. What matters now is moving forward, I said, watching my granddaughter's delighted face as she discovered that Spanish fireflies were just as magical as American ones, and understanding each other better. Are you happy here, Grandma? Emma asked, abandoning her firefly chase to climb onto my lap. Really, truly happy. I looked around at the villa where Roberto and I had dreamed of spending our retirement, at the garden we had planted together, at the family who was finally seeing me as I really was rather than as they had assumed I must be. Really, truly happy, I confirmed, and it was absolutely true. On their last night in Valencia, Michael and I took a walk on the beach while Jennifer and Emma picked up some last-minute souvenirs in the village. I've been thinking about what Emma said, Michael told me as we watched the sunset paint the Mediterranean in shades of gold and pink. About you being happy here. She's right, you seem like yourself again. Actually, you seem like more yourself than I've seen you in years. I feel like myself again. For the first time since your father died, I feel like Elena Martinez rather than like someone's widow or someone's burden. You were never a burden, Mom. I hope you know that. I was terrified of making the wrong decision, so I convinced myself that making all the decisions was better than letting you make any decisions. Fear makes people do strange things, I said, thinking about my own fears during those dark weeks after Roberto's death. But the antidote to fear isn't control, it's trust. I'm learning that. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the waves and watching other families enjoying the warm Spanish evening. Do you think Dad would be proud of what you've done? Michael asked suddenly. I thought about Roberto, about his unwavering belief in my strength, about his joy in this house we had chosen together, about his respect for independence and his love for family. I think he'd be proud of both of us, I said. Proud of me for having the courage to build a new life, and proud of you for learning to respect my choices even when they surprised you. I hope so. I know so. When they left the next morning, I felt sad to see them go but not desperate or lonely. I felt connected to them in a way that was stronger than before, because our relationship was now based on mutual respect rather than assumed dependence. 6 months later, I received a phone call from Michael that surprised me in the best possible way. Mom, I have some news, and I hope you'll think it's good news. I'm listening. Jennifer and I have been talking about making some changes in our own lives, seeing how happy you are in Spain, seeing how brave you were to start over. It's made us think about what we really want out of life. What kind of changes? We're thinking about taking a sabbatical year in Europe. Jennifer's company has offered her a position in their London office, and we could rent out our house for a year to cover the mortgage. Emma is so excited about the possibility. She keeps talking about how brave Grandma Alina was to move to a new country, and how she wants to be brave like that too. That sounds wonderful, Michael. We were wondering, would you be willing to give us some advice about making an international move, about what it's really like to start over somewhere new? The fact that my son was asking for my advice, rather than assuming he knew what was best, felt like a complete transformation of our relationship. I'd be honored to help however I can. And Moms, thank you. For what? For showing us that it's never too late to choose a different life, for proving that people can be stronger and more adaptable than anyone expects them to be. for teaching Emma that courage doesn't have an age limit. After we hung up, I sat on my terrace thinking about the unexpected directions life can take. A year ago, I had been a grieving widow being told I was nothing without my husband. Now I was a woman living independently in Spain, giving advice to my son about international adventure, planning visits from a granddaughter who saw me as an example of courage rather than an object of pity. The sun was setting over Valencia, painting the sky in those familiar shades of orange and pink that matched the citrus trees in my garden. I raised my glass of Spanish wine to the evening air, to Roberto's memory, and to the woman I had discovered I could be when I stopped letting other people define my limitations. That evening I called my neighbor Patricia, a British woman who had become one of my closest friends in the international community. "How was the family visit?" she asked. "Better than I ever could have hoped. I think we've all learned some important lessons about independence and respect and the difference between helping and controlling. The most important lesson being that you're perfectly capable of taking care of yourself." "No," I said, thinking about it carefully. "I think the most important lesson is that taking care of yourself and staying connected to the people you love aren't mutually exclusive. You can be independent and still be part of a family. You can make your own decisions and still value other people's input. You can grieve and heal and start over without having to choose between autonomy and relationship." "Very wise, your husband would be proud." "He would. He always said that the strongest relationships are between people who choose to be together, not people who need to be together." Sounds like he was a smart man. He was, and I think he'd be happy to know that I finally learned to choose my own life, even after he wasn't here to choose it with me. A year later, I had fully settled into my Spanish life. I was fluent in the language, deeply integrated into both the local community and the international expatriate network, and more content than I had been in years. The villa had become truly mine, filled with new memories and experiences while still honoring the dreams Roberto and I had shared. Michael, Jennifer, and Emma had indeed taken their sabbatical year in London, and they visited me in Valencia regularly. Each visit strengthened our relationship and demonstrated how much our family dynamic had changed. Instead of treating me like someone who needed to be managed, they treated me like someone whose opinions and experiences were valuable. Emma, now 13, had become fluent in Spanish during her visits and was constantly begging her parents to consider moving to Europe permanently. "Why don't we just live near Grandma Alina?" she would say. "She's proved that you can be happy anywhere if you're brave enough to try new things." One afternoon in late spring, I was working in my garden when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, the voice was familiar. "Señora Martinez, this is Carmen Ruiz. I don't know if you remember me." "Carmen," I exclaimed, immediately recognizing the voice of the woman who had sold us the villa 15 years earlier. "Of course I remember you. How wonderful to hear from you. I heard through friends that you are living in Valencia now permanently, and I heard about your husband's passing. I am so sorry for your loss." "Thank you, Roberto loved this house so much. Being here makes me feel close to him." "That makes my heart happy. When I sold you the house, I could see how much you both loved it. I knew you would take good care of it." "We did, and I still am. That is why I am calling. My granddaughter Sophia is getting married next month, and I wondered, would you consider letting us have the wedding reception in your garden? The same garden where you and Roberto used to sit in the evenings." I looked around at the beautiful space Roberto and I had created together, imagining it filled with celebration and joy and new beginnings. "I would be honored," I said. The wedding reception was magical. Sophia was a lovely young woman who reminded me of myself at her age, full of dreams and determination and the kind of quiet strength that would serve her well in the years ahead. Her fiancé was a kind man who looked at her the way Roberto had always looked at me, with respect and love and genuine partnership. During the reception, Carmen and I sat together on the terrace, watching the young couple dance under the stars. "You know," Carmen said, "when I met you and Roberto 15 years ago, I could see that you were true partners. Equal partners, that's rare, especially in marriages from your generation. It was the foundation of everything we built together, including your strength now. A woman who was truly partnered in her marriage doesn't become helpless when her husband dies. She becomes, how do you say, more herself." "That's exactly right. Roberto always said I was stronger than I knew. After he died, I had to learn to believe that myself. And now you're teaching other people to believe it too. Your son, your granddaughter, they see you differently now, yes." "Very differently. My son used to see me as his father's dependent. Now he sees me as an independent woman who happens to be his mother. This is good. Children need to see their parents as whole people, not just as parents. It helps them understand what they can become themselves." As the evening wound down and the wedding guests began to leave, Sophia approached our table with her new husband. "Señora Martinez," she said in careful English, "thank you so much for sharing your beautiful home with us. Abuela Carmen told me the story of how you and your husband bought this house and how you came here to start a new life after he died. You are an inspiration. You're very kind, but I'm not sure I'm particularly inspiring. I just did what I needed to do to take care of myself. That's exactly what makes you inspiring, Sophia's husband said. You showed that it's never too late to choose your own path, even when other people think they know what's best for you. After they left, I sat alone on the terrace with a glass of wine, thinking about Roberto and all the dreams we had shared in this exact spot. The garden was quiet now, but it still held the echo of laughter and music and celebration. Thank you, I whispered to the night air, to Roberto's memory, to the house that had become my sanctuary. Thank you for giving me a place where I could remember who I was before I became who I needed to be. The next morning, I woke up to a beautiful Spanish sunrise and the sound of my phone ringing. It was Emma calling from London, where she was spending the summer with her parents. Grandma Alina, guess what? Mom and Dad said we can spend Christmas with you in Valencia this year, and they're thinking about looking for a house in Spain too. Not to live there all the time, but to have a place where we can spend summers and holidays. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. Dad said you've shown our whole family that it's possible to create a life anywhere, as long as you're brave enough to try. He said you've taught us that home isn't just a place, it's what you make of the place you choose. After we hung up, I walked out to my garden and sat among the orange trees Roberto and I had planted together. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from grieving widow to independent woman, from someone other people tried to control to someone who had reclaimed complete authority over her own life. The sun was warm on my face, the Mediterranean breeze carried the scent of orange blossoms, and in the distance I could hear the sound of church bells marking the beginning of another day in the life I had chosen for myself. I was 53 years old, I was living alone in a foreign country, and I had never been more certain that I was exactly where I belonged. Tomorrow I would wake up in my Spanish villa and decide how to spend my day. Maybe I would walk to the beach, maybe I would meet friends for coffee, maybe I would work in my garden, maybe